Welcome to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast.
M-I-C
K-E-Y?
M-O-U-S-C.
Now I have the rest of the song in my head.
Well, of course you do. Hi, this is Don, and
Alexis.
welcome back to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. And if you're wondering why I would start with the famous introduction to the Mickey Mouse Club, it's not just because I've somehow lost my marbles and I've gone insane. It's the topic that we're going to be covering today, along with Alexis and I doing that together. So today we're going to look at the historical what if, which I guess for some people is just literally lacking imagination or unimaginable, as if there was no such thing as
Walt Disney.
Walt Disney and everything that flows from being quote unquote
Disney.
So, when I say Disney, and we should give you a little bit of a fair warning before we go into this episode. This is not one of those episodes where we spent an extensive amount of time, combing every inch of the internet, particularly not every inch of the internet that has something to say about Disney. That would
have taken like days and weeks.
Taken a really long time. This is one of those things we sort of felt like we did a little bit of research, but could sort of do without, going into it. So this is going to be more of a, think of this as more of a free-form rapping kind of episode as we go through it here.
And it's a little more whimsical,
Yeah, and we've talked before about the fact that we like to do these things of whimsy every once in a while. Not every episode of A Fork in Time needs to have somebody
plot,
assassination, or something else. So I'm asking some of these questions. This will be fresh to us, as fresh to us as it is to you. So I'm going to ask Alexis, when I say just Disney, randomly, what is the word association things that pop into your head?
Well, as we were talking a little bit off podcast, Disney for me is kind of the first vacation that I really remember. We'd gone on a couple of vacations as a family prior to that, but I really only remember those vacations by looking at pictures. But Disney, which we went to in 97, is kind of the first trip that I have my own memories from. I actually remember things that happened on that trip. So those are the kind of things that popped into my head. I have Slinky Dog from Toy Story.
Okay.
In my head.
Which she also has in her head probably because of a picture as well.
Yes.
But also
But I remember that.
But she remembers that actually happening. So when I say Disney, what else do you think of?
Well, of course, I also think of all the Disney princesses, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. I think of the theme park. I think of, we sang the song at the beginning. I think of the Mickey Mouse Club, and of course, all the artists that we now know that made appearances on Mickey Mouse Club that, again, we'll probably get into a little bit. But then I also kind of further out kind of start conjecturing and thinking about things that aren't Disney, but things like DreamWorks and Pixar and other companies that we've come to be associated with and kind of know that they would probably look dramatically different if there was no Disney, or they might not exist if there was no Disney.
Right. So this is going to be one of those topics that is so broad we won't be able to cover it all. We'll end up just covering parts of it. So there's a better than even chance that we will not even talk about something that is in your mind that is Disney related. And certainly that's going to vary by generation. There's no doubt about my impression of Disney. And I also have a Walt Disney World trip in my head, or a Disney experience. So I've been to both parks, I guess, been to both Disney World and Disneyland. So my experience would be different than Alexis's, would be different than somebody who's older than I am, or someone that's younger than both of us. So we recognize that. So we hope that you find today's episode just a fun little diversionary kind of trip where we're going to go down the path of what if there was no Disney. We'll be back after the break.
Would groceries delivered to you in as fast as 1 hour save you a trip to the store? Instacart makes that possible thanks to personal shoppers in your area who hand select items based on your preferences from the stores you love. And shopping multiple stores is possible on a single order. Instacart picks the freshest produce and even keeps your eggs safe, all while finding everything you usually buy, providing smart suggestions for new items, and even highlighting deals to help you save money. And now you get free delivery on your first order over $35. Let Instacart know we sent you and help support our show by following the link in the show notes. Instacart. Groceries delivered in as fast as 1 hour.
Welcome back to A Fork in Time, the Alt History Podcast. Don being joined today by Alexis, and as we set up there before the break, we're doing one of these, what I call in my own head, sort of a whimsy episode, something that's more pop culture and not as serious history. We're talking about what if there had been no Disney. So just exploring a little bit about the Disney the what did, more importantly. When you think Walt Disney, Lex, or when you think Disney, do you think more the corporation, something else, or do you actually get this picture of a guy in your head?
Oh, I definitely think of the corporation. I have, it's like a flood of images that come into my head, and then I have to kind of track it back and realize that, okay, this corporation that does 7,000 different things, all kind of started with this one man named Walt Disney.
Yeah, Walt Disney. And so Disney was an animator before that was really a thing.
Yeah.
A guy who drew cartoons in the 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually created this, worked for a couple of different studios and different things. This is actually this is the end of the silent picture era as we're moving into quote-unquote talkies, or with sound for the first time. And so one of the characters that he creates is this mouse. And one of the interesting things that looking at and doing the research here is the mouse that we know as Mickey hasn't always been
Mickey.
No. Do you happen to know what the first name of Mickey was before he was Mickey?
Wasn't it like Mortimer or something?
Mortimer Mouse.
Yeah, that doesn't have the same ring to it.
No, it doesn't. For example, we would have been leading the show off with Mortimer.
Yeah, not the same ring.
Not the same thing. And so he did draw some cartoons and I guess a couple of animations with Mortimer Mouse. You'd recognize him more or less as Mickey, or what became Mickey, although Mickey has evolved over the years in a lot of ways. But basically, Walt's wife, Lillian, didn't like the name Mortimer, and so Mortimer very quickly turned into Mickey.
Good on you, Lillian.
Yeah, so Lillian's contribution is maybe
change
small.
The name.
Yeah, maybe small, but maybe it's big. But after that, Disney goes into starting to making other films. The first quote-unquote non-silent, the first sound-related one is sort of famous. It's Steamboat Willie, which is black and white. But then they do transition very early on into doing animation in Technicolor. And many of the things that became animation were hallmarks of Disney.
Right.
And so just name some Disney animated movies.
Fantasia, Cinderella, Snow White, let's see, Sleeping Beauty. Those are the ones that are immediately popping into my head.
Yeah, and common themes there. We talked about this, I think, a little bit before, where we will. The princess theme, picking up on popular fairy tale kind of themes and doing them in an animated fashion.
Right.
But not just exclusively that. 101 Dalmatians. So you have these, and there's classic, the offsetting the classic princess or hero roles are the classic Disney villains. For example, when I think 1001 Dalmatians, I don't think of it. The first thing that pops into my head is
Cruella de Vil.
And again, so
much so that she's getting her own movie.
Well, there you go. And it'd be one thing if Disney were just all of these animated films, and there were tons of animated films. But then eventually Disney transitions into live-action films. And so you end up with, I'm just looking here at the list. Famous Disney films we did not even mention. Bambi.
Oh, wow, yep.
Dumbo.
Fox and the Hound.
Yeah, just all of these. Again, you could just go on and on and on with Disney animation. But then they transition into live action movies. And so, things like all kinds of Herbie movies, for example. But also things like popular things like the vehicle that launched Julie Andrews,
Yes.
which is
Mary Poppins.
Mary Poppins. So again, all of these are Disney films. Disney was the premier. Most studios were still more family friendly back then, but Disney was the premier go-to family friendly movie
Right.
company. Animation, live action. There were stars that were formed. Young stars that were. Kurt Russell, for example, was appeared in a number of Disney films. Don Knotts, I can remember doing a number of these. I mean, there were these recurring folks that were there, but they didn't limit themselves to movies.
Right.
Because with that fame also flipped over to the first version of the Mickey Mouse Club, which is in the 1950s, if my memory serves well. And so there you have folks that some of our older listeners will certainly remember or reference, but like Annette Funicello and some of the others. These were kids that grew up on the Mickey Mouse Club and then transitioned into being adult actresses or stars or that kind of thing. But then you even had, they came to TV, there was, what I remember, we were talking about your memories as a kid, one of my memories as a kid is in the 70s, every Sunday night on NBC was The Wonderful World of Disney. And so, you had a Disney film or an animation or something like that. But also the theme parks. You talked about your trip to Walt Disney World that we took in the mid-90s. I took a trip when I was about the same age as you. I think it was 73 when we went to Walt Disney World, which was in Florida, which was newly opened. Disneyland had been around in California for a little while, but opening up in Florida when it was nothing like what it is today. It was just a part of what Walt Disney World is today.
Or nothing like it even was when I went in the 90s.
Right. There was no Epcot. There was no... when we were there in the 90s was... the studios were called was the MGM studios at the time. Later now, that's the Disney Studios part of that. There was no Animal Kingdom. There was no water park. There was the one Disney hotel. I don't think they had built many of the others yet, like the Wilderness Lodge. I think it was the Disneyland hotel that the monorail went through if you stayed on property. That was all there. So that theme park thing had happened. But this is long before the theme parks go international because they're now just not in the United States. There's
Paris.
There's Disney Europe, and there's Disney Tokyo, and there's others. And we were talking off podcast, there's the cruise lines now.
Yes.
So, in fact, the idea, I use the word theme park, the idea of theme park
is a Disney invention.
Is really a Disney invention. There were amusement parks, that had some themes around them, but the idea of the full-blown theme park was purely Disney.
Yeah, little side note, but another podcast, if you're interested, Stuff You Missed in History Class, one of the co-hosts on that show is obsessed with the Haunted Mansion. So she's even done an episode on the Haunted Mansion, which is in Disney, and that's a whole thing in and of itself, just that one ride. So yeah, the theme park is very much a Disney invention.
Yeah, and the concept of but it's the magical kingdom. It's this place that sort of, exists in a fantasy realm. Everything is perfect. Everything is, even the way that the theme park was managed, keeping the streets clean and the back office. We know some people that, I know one person in particular, I won't mention her name, but I know that she worked at Disney when she was in college and was interning in hospitality. And she's told me the stories, there's all the behind the scenes thing at Disney too, because it takes a lot of people to make this happen. Like one of the interesting things doing the research here, there's almost 250,000 Disney employees worldwide.
See, and that seems like low to me when you think about all the things that Disney is involved in. But yeah, that's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people. But of course, that's theme parks and movie production studios and stores around all the things that are Disney, cruise lines, all those types of things. But there's 250,000 people that exist because a guy named Walt Disney originally drew a mouse cartoon named Mortimer that became Mickey, and everything grew from there. So they had captured movies, they had captured television, the theme park thing, but ain't no stopping them.
No.
Right? Because then what we have is they transition over and use that to buy other media firms. So initially, as the cable channel universe expands, there's a Disney Channel.
Yeah, and I even remember as a kid, our cable provider had the East Coast feed and the West Coast feed of Disney on different channels. So if I missed a show on the East Coast feed, I could wait a couple hours and catch it on the West Coast feed.
And that was not true of every network that existed at the time. That was one of the ones they did that special for. I hadn't thought of it. Now that you say that, I remember that, because I remember thinking, why do we have both feeds of the... Well, I think we're only paying for one. That's the good news. But and then even now, as they've expanded out, they have bought other studios. So, for example, everything that we know that is Marvel Studios now is owned by Disney. Well, certainly in the last 15 years, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, all that goes with that, from the earliest days of Iron Man all the way up through, the latest incarnations of this, things like Avengers Endgame and the other things that flow off of that. That's all, wait for it, that's all Disney. And just, it's incredible if they were just that.
Right.
But they're not.
No.
Because what else does Disney own?
Disney also owns a couple other animation studios that you might have heard of.
A little thing called Pixar?
Yeah, just a little company.
Yeah, and then, they also own, just broadcast television networks.
Yes, just straight broadcast networks.
Yeah, like ABC in the United States. And they also own cable networks, like sport networks like ESPN. They have grown into being a media giant. It seems like too small.
Yeah, it's strange to be watching our local ABC affiliate and they'll be doing a story and then they have to stop and say, just so you're aware, this station is owned by Disney.
Yeah. And so then the other thing that they also did was they eventually then go off to produce or create other, I know we're jumping around here, it's almost what you have to do, Disney. But I mentioned that, known for their animation, known for their family-friendly fare. I remember it was a big deal. I'm probably around the age of 10. Disney finally actually released for its first time in, what was it? I'm looking at the year here. It was in 1979, so I'm 11. They released their first movie that did not get a G rating. Do you have any idea what that is?
1979?
Mm-hmm.
Was it a live-action movie?
It was a live-action movie.
Is it a Herbie movie?
It was not a Herbie movie.
Drawing a blank.
It's actually The Black Hole.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I've heard of it. I don't know if I've ever seen it.
And so this is in 79. This is post-Star Wars, so trying to capture on that sci-fi thing. And it was considered just a little bit too dark to get a G rating. In fact, it's unclear whether they were actually pushing for it to not be a G rating because they wanted to sort of step up and get this other audience, as especially motion pictures were changing in the 70s. But they come along and produce. You watch it today, and the reason this got a PG was what? There was no PG-13 yet, but so that was there. But then they transitioned. They created Touchstone films or Touchstone Pictures, so they could venture more into like the PG-13 space, and even eventually into more, even the more adult space as well. All of this is Disney. So that's a big broad sweep of the what did, because we could spend literally hours talking about the what did.
Right.
But we're a what if podcast.
Correct.
So how are we going to get rid of Disney? What's your plan, Lex?
So, I mean, I think it's kind of unfair to this guy named Walt Disney to say, okay, you're never allowed to be an animator. But maybe he's just never a successful animator. Maybe he never changes the name to Mickey. Maybe it's always Mortimer and it just doesn't quite catch on. That's what I'm going to go with.
Okay, so the way we're going to fork things here is if there was no success to the same level by Walt Disney, and then by extension all the things that Disney grew to be over time. Because they will tell you that a lot of that was his vision, the vision of his brother, who was a major influencer in the company as well. So now let's look about how things would have been different with no Disney, because we're going to carry it all the way back. So I guess one of the first questions, again, we didn't talk about this all podcast, so this is all coming fresh and live. But we're bound to have cartoons of some variety, right? It's not like cartoons didn't exist.
I think that's definitely true. You're bound to have some cartoon of some iteration. I'm struggling to figure out what that iteration is, because so much of the technology that we know as cartoons was created by Disney.
Yeah, and in fact, to say cartoons, I use that word, so that's on me. When we talk about Disney, we talk about animation.
Right.
and you'll see the things where they talk about there, the art forms, the technology. I mean, frame by frame. This was a whole animation was something that existed in the idea that there was animation in the lowest, but animation, I'm using big air quotes now, didn't exist until Disney created what we think of and know as animation.
So I think somebody else maybe would have come along and created something similar, but I don't think it would have had that signature quality that we've come to recognize.
Right. And so you would have maybe had cartoons, or they maybe would have stayed a children's fair.
Right.
More so, but not, or the type of thing that would show before a live action matinee, on a in the 40s or 50s at where kids would go on a Saturday to go see something. You may have had the cartoon short, but nothing like the full length. Again, right. I'm talking about now. Full length animation was something that Disney brought to bear, because animation before that was a short. It was a short little film, or it was a cartoon.
Right.
And so we would not have that per se.
Correct.
Which makes me wonder if, again, I agree, somebody probably would have come along and maybe have done animation in the way that Disney did it, would have formed a different way. So the two forks that I can think of there, the potential is, yes, we eventually get this art form called animation. It's somebody else, or it's more widely spread. Maybe it crops up somewhere else. But whoever did that may have only wanted to stay in the animation lane.
Right.
And so all the other things that eventually were outflows of Disney would have never happened. You would have just had Disney replacement does really good animated films, slides into feature-length films, and that's it. There's no theme parks. There's no crossover to television. There's no live action from that same studio, and all the things that we talked about flow from there.
Right. I mean, you mentioned you kind of have that dual lane of, yes, there's the creativity with Disney, but then there's also the business side of it. So if you just have that person that's like, I'm just focused on the creative side, and they never jump over and build the empire that we know of is Disney.
Right. And so that's one of the logical things that is there. But again, if you don't transition over to the TV part, the early expression of the Mickey Mouse Club doesn't exist. So I could say Annette Funicello, and you would go, Who? Where there's a whole generation of people that are older than I am who they know who Annette Funicello is.
Right.
From the Mickey Mouse Club. But if you don't have the original Mickey Mouse Club, you don't have a subsequent version of the Mickey Mouse Club.
Right. So I could say Christina Aguilera.
Okay. I've heard of her.
Or Britney Spears.
Heard of her.
Or Justin Timberlake.
Yeah. So these major pop artists that we know today got their start on a revitalized Mickey Mouse Club that was part of the Disney Channel experience when they were growing that part of the media empire.
Yep.
It's all connected there. The other thing that immediately jumps to mind for me is I can remember the first time it happened in, I think it was the Super Bowl that was played in 1983. I'm not going to try to remember which Roman numeral that was, but it was the Super Bowl in which the Redskins won the game. Notable game because important game in terms of race relations in the United States, because it was a black quarterback of the Redskins, Doug Williams, was the first one to do that famous thing that all kinds of athletes do after they won a championship, which is, where are they going?
To Disney World.
I'm going to Disney World. That whole idea that they had already prearranged with whoever was the star of the game to record that on the field, and then the next day he would be at Disney World. That came out in the early 80s, when I was in high school. Again, we would not have that direct connection that's there. So there's, as you point out, you just named some pretty big recording artists that have sold a lot of records and made a lot of money and had a lot of controversy, obviously, associated around them in some instances. But do any of those exist in the same way that we know them if they hadn't have had the launch there?
I don't think so.
So there are other things that were launched on the Disney Channel. So there's other child stars that sort of flow out of that whole Disney Channel genre.
Hilary Duff.
Okay.
Lizzie McGuire. Raven Simone. That's a Raven. So yeah, it wasn't just the Mickey Mouse Club. Several actors also got their start on the Disney Channel. Miley Cyrus.
Wow. Again, not everything that happens in Forks is bad. Sometimes maybe the Forks may be good. I'm just saying, maybe a little less Hannah Montana, or whatever Hannah Montana became, we'd all be better off for. But the whole point of this is the influence on popular culture is undeniable.
Yes.
And that all flows from the fact that there was a Disney. But I want to talk a little bit about one of the other big changes there, because that's true. But this idea of media conglomerates were not completely new. Major studios owned a lot of stuff, that type of thing. But what Disney has become, I have a hard time thinking of any other company that exists that is exactly like Disney in terms of their media footprint. Can you think of one, Lex?
No, and it's not just their media footprint. It's kind of their diversity. I mean, we've mentioned so many things. I mean, an animation studio and a cruise ship on paper have nothing to do with each other, but they're both owned by Disney.
Right.
So it is very unique in that it is probably the only company I can think of that is as big as it is and as broad as it is in its holdings, yet somehow they can make them all connect and intertwine in a way that makes sense.
Right.
And it's not just like we own a bunch of random stuff.
Right. And yeah, and I think you make an excellent point there, which is the idea, not that any of this was completely unique to Disney. Disney just took it, Disney was all these things and is all these things sort of on steroids, in the sense of, was there cross promotion between, TV and movies? Certainly to a degree that happened. Nothing like the level of cross promotion that we see with what Disney was even in its early days. I'm not talking about even back, the idea of the theme park tying back to this, tying back to that, but certainly what it's grown to now. I mean, for example, I can think of here just in the last year, but particularly can think of within the last few months, 2 shows that are on the American Broadcasting Company, ABC in the United States, that are have pretty good ratings. One of them is the second iteration of American Idol. Mm-hmm. And then another one being Dancing with the Stars. The thing that I think about with both of these shows, because they're on ABC, is that they make a point of at least one episode out of every season doing what?
It's Disney night.
It's Disney night. And
usually that involves a trip to Disneyland or Disney World.
Correct. And or it involves music from Disney films, or in the case of Dancing with the Stars, music and themes that are around the idea of Disney. What goes better for waltzes than a bunch of dancing princesses, right?
Exactly.
But what you see there is that very...
It's intentional cross-promotion.
And it's intentional, and it's also intense cross-promotion. But there's enough in the quote-unquote... In fact, I was actually thinking about this, the American Idol episode of this season, which reason, there's enough in the Disney catalog for them to be able to find songs of all genres and all types to come back into this, because it's not just a couple of movies that you got a couple of tunes from. It's...
Yeah, in fact, I'm thinking now that you've mentioned Dancing with the Stars, and I've watched that show since the beginning. It's been on for quite a few years. And I'm sure they've probably doubled up on songs for Disney Night, but they don't do it very often. There is enough in the Disney catalog and there is enough variety that they don't have to always go to the same songs and even the same movies. They have so many different things to choose from that they might repeat, but it might be a few years before they repeat.
Right. And again, why that's worth mentioning is that if you think now, we tend to look at that and we think of that as being something that happens a lot. Mm-hmm. It's cross-promotion between a movie release and a special kids meal at a fast food restaurant. Not an uncommon thing. It's not an uncommon thing today. In fact, it's the norm today. But Disney's way of doing things was a big part of what
made it the norm?
Made it the norm as big as it is. Again, it's not like it didn't exist before, because there was cross-promotion.
Right.
But not to the level, the strength, the depth, the power that exists behind it that we see with Disney today. That brought that to a whole other level, or 2 or 3 or 4 levels up, right?
Correct. Definitely.
And, the other thing that jumped out, I was just looking at some of the things that Disney owns. I mentioned ABC as a network. They own FX networks, by the way. Also mentioned, of course, the various other studios that they own. It's easy to forget, for example, they obviously own Marvel. Oh, they bought Lucasfilm.
Yeah, they bought this little thing called Star Wars.
Yeah, and 20th Century. That was a late acquisition, and they've been slowly but surely feeding that back into the theme park experience. And as a result of that, but one of the other things that jumped out to me is they have their own streaming network, Disney Plus.
Yes.
Which I'll talk a little bit how Disney Plus has some unique power also because it's Disney. Disney Plus, Hulu, and ESPN Plus are a packaged streaming thing that you can do together.
Yep.
So Hulu, which wandered around as a competitor to Netflix in the streaming world for a while, Hulu has produced its own programming. Things on Hulu that are very non-Disney, to say the least.
Yeah, I can think of two things that are very, very non-Disney that immediately pop in my head.
Yeah, and so there's the diversification that's happened. When you think about it, all started with a little bitty innocent mouse, and you go from Mortimer Mouse to The Handmaid's Tale, for example.
Or The Looming Tower.
Yeah, or something like that. You see just how this company has morphed, but how it has its fingers or hands in sort of everything that's out there. So, they've taken that to another level. What else would be different if there were no Disney?
We've talked a little bit about, animation being different, and we've touched on the fact that, Disney obviously owns other movie studios and things like that. So I'm now jumping over in my head to movies that aren't Disney, but would those even exist if there was no Disney? So things like Monsters, Inc., Inside Out, Up are all Pixar movies. But would those exist?
Toy Story.
All three of them Toy Story. So would those things exist in the same way? They're not Disney in the classic sense, but they grow from Disney. Right. So, yeah.
Well, in fact, as regular Disney animation was dying, there were other animation studios that were putting out, I think, generally inferior animation, but in the realm of animation, they could get folks to go and see those movies. Disney changed the game all of a sudden with Pixar.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can remember Toy Story. I distinctly remember Toy Story. You were very young when Toy Story premiered, but I can remember being encouraged to go and see Toy Story, which was okay for you as a kid, and you were a young kid at the time. But
is that 93,
94, something like that. Yeah. So you're not even in school yet, but I remember there were things in there for adults.
Oh yeah, because watching it now, I'm going that joke totally went over my head when I was 4.
Right. And that was something but again, they morphed, and again, if you look at Toy Story's animation, which was computer animation, taking the place of the hand-drawn animation, all the stuff that it took, they developed technologies to be able to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So there's technologies that are used today for rendering images and things like that I know from watching documentaries are not just limited to computer animation. They're used for virtual reality. And in other words, that animation takes its practical application into the real world in different ways. It was technology that originally sort of led to Toy Story, but it eventually ends up being used in virtual simulations that maybe the military is using to train soldiers. That technology grows out of that path.
Yeah, or an architecture firm is using to build skyscrapers.
Or to render what the skyscraper would look like before it's even built to sort of do
right,
things.
Before they've even laid the foundation.
Yeah, that all flows from Disney in some way, shape, or fashion. Again, all of these things I think have the likelihood of coming along in different ways, but the point is they come along in different ways, not the way that we know them.
Well, and not just in different ways, but in different times.
Right.
Do we skew the timeline by 5, 10, 15, as much as 20 years? And what does that do pushing that forward? Because if we're having to wait those years, it's obviously not as advanced as what it is now. And is it not being able to be used by things like the military and things like that because it's not as advanced, because we got that late start,
right? Because
there was no Disney.
Yeah, and so again, it all ties together, and I guess the point of this exercise, it's like a couple of other what if exercises that we've done. It's hard to imagine the world without it because it is so permeated with it.
Mm-hmm.
For example, even someone who's much younger, their image of Snow White, when you say Snow White, is the Walt Disney image of Snow White.
Oh, yeah.
Their image of Cinderella, their idea of what a castle is. For many
I mean, I'm still mad that when I went to Disney World, the castle didn't look like a castle.
I remember, what did the castle look like?
It looked like a birthday cake.
It looked like a birthday cake because it was the anniversary of Disney.
Yep.
And so I think it was the 25th anniversry of Disney.
Yep.
So they had it looking like a
Birthday cake.
So you didn't get your classic French Cinderella
No,
castle.
I didn't.
And you're not happy about that.
No, it just means I have to go back to Disney World.
Which is what they want you to do anyway. So again, that just the way that it permeates culture, I guess, is the last thing I want to talk about here is there are cultural references, the one we started the show with, that are known by people. There are people that know MICKEYMOUSC that have never seen one episode
Of the Mickey Mouse Club.
ever of the Mickey Mouse Club. That's just in popular culture.
Yep.
There are people that know the references, we talked about there to the various princes that aren't in popular culture. Somebody can make a spoof of the opening thing of The Lion King where Simba's being lifted. Why do people know what that is without it even being said? Because it's Disney.
Right. I think I've even said, I'm going to have a Simba moment.
Right.
And people know what I'm talking about.
Right. And, for example, that's a great example of something that's there, having those references. The death of Bambi's mother.
Yep.
At the start of Bambi. People will tell you that for some kids, that was their first exposure to and trying to get their head around this idea of death and loss and grief and all the things that go with that. If I played a lot of paintball with your uncle, my brother-in-law, and his call sign on the paintball field was
Thumper.
And immediately people had in their head Thumper from Bambi. So it was just this, they're so entrenched in popular culture that you can't undo them.
Right.
Would something be in its place?
Yes.
Yes. The problem is because we had Disney, we have no idea what that
Is
something would be.
No.
I'm reminded here a lot of when we did the episodes, one of my favorite episodes we ever did. I invite our newer listeners to go back and listen to it. It's and today, it's sort of appropriate. We're recording here in early May, so we're actually on May 5th today, but yesterday was May 4th, which is quote unquote Star Wars Day because Disney property. Because May the 4th be with you. That's in culture. When we did the episode on Star Wars, what if there had been no Star Wars? We said something replaces that. What replaces? We have no idea because what happened.
Right.
So the interesting thing about this type, particularly a lot of cultural what ifs, is you don't know what the what if would have been because the what did is
so permeated.
The other thing that jumped in my mind there's something we were talking about The Lion King. Disney takes old stories, animates them, been around long enough they can come back and turn them into live action movies. Lion King,
Cinderella,
Beauty and the Beast. Take them to Broadway.
Mulan.
Take them to Broadway.
Yep.
Because they're musicals. And so, there's the old concept of, I forget what they call the people that have won all 4 of the awards, a Grammy, a Tony, an Oscar, and an Emmy.
Yeah. I can't remember what the acronym is now.
It is an acronym of those things. Somebody listening will know what I'm talking about. Disney is in all those genres.
Yes.
Broadway. So, there have been Tony Award-winning things that were Disney. There have been Emmy Award-winning things that were Disney. There have been Oscar Award-winning things that were Disney. Grammy Award-winning things that were Disney. Disney is in all of these areas of media, and they made so much money doing that they bought a network. They own the news. They own ABC News. It's ironic. One of the things I listen to, for those of you that are familiar with the 538, their politics podcast, which is owned by, or was partnership with ABC News, they constantly have to make reference to the fact sometimes, again, like the fact that they are owned by Disney. And so, Walton as Mortimer Mouse is talking about polling in recent elections. That's the connection. That's how powerful Disney is. So, any other big what ifs you can think about? There's no possible way we can be exhaustive on this topic, so I'll just ask if you can think of anything else before we close out the show to sort of make sure that we don't miss it, kind of thing.
I mean, I think we covered it all. Just I have one memory that keeps popping into my head, so I'm just gonna close out with this, just because I feel like if I don't say it, it's just gonna sit in my head. But when we took our trip to Alaska, we did a cruise, and when we left port, the ship that was sitting next to us was a Disney ship that also left port as well. And so for a little while, as we're leaving port, we're still within range of the Disney ship. And I remember that the horn on the Disney ship was "When You Wish Upon a Star." And I feel like in the 30 minutes, we were probably close enough to the ship that we could kind of hear what was going on in the ship. I think they sounded that horn probably 10 times. And I remember saying, I would be so, it would drive me a little bit crazy. But it's so, the Disney brand. It's in thinking, the 10th time I heard it, it was but if it wasn't that, what would it be? Because that song is so iconically Disney. So it's okay, if it wasn't "When You Wish Upon a Star," what would that song have been? Would have been something from The Lion King or something? I don't know. So it's one of those things that Disney is so many things, yet somehow they have made them all interconnected in a way that makes sense, and it doesn't seem disjointed, and it doesn't seem like it's not that's Disney. Duh.
Yeah. The thing that popped into my head, because I remember first getting Disney Plus as a streaming channel, not because we needed to watch a bunch of Disney, the classic Disney animated films, which is a big deal for the parents who shell it out to do
not why
that.
we got Disney Plus.
But it was what the other main reason for it, but part of it was because of the Star Wars stuff that was being on there, and this thing called The Mandalorian, which was getting all this buzz, so being able to see that. Then the other thing relates back to this, and we'll sort of close out the show here because it actually connects in very nicely to something else, and that's when the pandemic came along and COVID came along, and it had long been already recorded, but they weren't sure when they were going to release it. But one of the big things that happened in summer of 2020 was
this little thing called Hamilton.
It was the streaming premiere of Hamilton on Disney Plus. And so I know a lot of people who had not had Disney Plus before that had to go and get Disney Plus because...
It's the only way they could watch Hamilton.
Yeah, and so here's my connection that I'll make there, again, just showing the power of Disney, which is why this is one of those, the what if is almost impossible, because you have to figure out what fits in all these holes across the spectrum. But so a Broadway musical featuring rap and other urban and hip-hop genres to talk about a founding father of the United States makes its way streamed to television as a movie when it probably would have been released in a theatrical movie on Disney's platform.
Yes.
That's the diversity. That's the diversity of Disney.
And not the broadcast station they own, but a streaming service
that they own. Yeah. And again, they weren't the first to do streaming, but they are one of the first to have connected multiple streaming services together because they have multiple platforms that they can do. It's, again, that powerful thing. The other reason that they've been successful, all the Marvel stuff is slowly but surely being transitioned off of other streaming platforms purely and exclusively to Disney Plus. During COVID, you can't release the live action Mulan. Where does it show up? As a premium
Disney
premiere
Plus.
On Disney. Yeah, it's an incredibly powerful thing, just who Disney is. And I know we've talked in circles right for the last 20 minutes. We can't tell you what it would be without it because we don't know. It's because Disney is everywhere. There's a similar episode probably at some point in our future, which is Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is everywhere. It's the same type of thing. They so permeate things you don't even realize that they're there. I said it'd be a good transition to mention Hamilton. So Lex, we've introduced it a little bit. Last episode is actually just, I think it was the ad that we plugged in because of the recording that you and I did. Let's just talk really briefly for our Fork in Time listeners here at the end of this episode about what's coming. What's coming? We're targeting this for June of 2021. What's coming?
So we're growing our podcast network here at A Fork in Time.
We're trying to be very, 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 very multiple places to the right of the decimal point Disney in this sense.
Yes. But we are adding another podcast. It's not going to be as frequent as A Fork in Time. It's not going to be every week. It's probably going to be maybe once a month is when we're kind of aiming for episodes. But we are going to be really talking, and it's not going to be alternative history. It's going to be regular history, what we call the what did here. We're going to be focusing on the what did, but we're going to be tying it into locations.
And so we mentioned Hamilton. The name of the podcast is inspired by one of the songs from Hamilton, which is The Room Where It Happens.
Yes.
We're adapting that a little bit and praying that Lin-Manuel Miranda doesn't sue us for this, but The Room Where It Happened. Yeah. And so, as we talked about on the little introductory thing, and we'll put a link in the show notes to our introductory thing on this as well for those that just want to share it. But the concept is to launch into these explorations of historical things by focusing on the location where it was. So that particular song from the musical Hamilton is about the Compromise of 1790, the deal that was struck between Hamilton and Madison and Jefferson over the Federal Reserve System and the location of the Capitol. And that happened. The room and place for that particular circumstance, the song's at, because not people focus around the fact that who was in the room. What really happened in the room was the dining room in Jefferson's house in New York, is where this gets struck. And so we started playing around with the idea of, well, there's other rooms like that in history. Wouldn't it be cool if we sort of use that as the launching point into bigger discussions? And so thus The Room Where It Happened is born.
Yes.
You mentioned the frequency a little bit less, that it's going to be more of a pure history analysis type of discussion type of thing. Still theorize maybe a little bit at times because, again, like that particular song from Hamilton, nobody really knows what happened in the room. We know what came out of the room, but what happened in the room is a little bit of a mystery. But there are lots of rooms throughout history. So the other thing about this, and the thing I want to mention here, which is what we want to encourage in this episode, is we don't envision this being a podcast that you and I are doing all the time.
No. I mean, we'll probably make appearances, but it won't be us all the time.
Yeah, in fact, it very rarely may be us if this is done right. What we're really looking for, and you've seen us do this more with A Fork in Time over the last year, as we brought in more contributors. An example of that would be Chris, who's now a regular contributor on the show, but others, names I can mention that have appeared more than once. But this idea that we know that we've been working on building this history community out there, the alternate history community. We have a large enough community now, and large enough interested folks that what we think we can do with The Room Where It Happened is actually build a team. And the thing that I want to express and make sure our listeners know is it's not too late to be part of that team.
No.
You don't have to already be somebody who's participated on A Fork in Time. You don't have to be somebody who's already given us listeners. All those things we appreciate, we love. A lot more. The vast majority of our episodes now come from listener suggestions, not our own thoughts or our own suggestions. And the people that suggest them are often invited to come be a guest on the show. But the whole concept of The Room Where It Happens is we're going to have a team of folks. I envision there's probably going to be at least half a dozen, maybe more, different folks that participate on the show, so that any one given show is going to be a different panel of, if you will, talking heads that are talking about whatever the subject is and taking different approaches. But it'll be diverse. And it also is intended to be a long-form podcast. I should mention that. Sometimes our episodes run a little bit longer. Sometimes they run a little bit shorter. We talked about this a couple of episodes ago. There's the Unsinkable Hospital Ship on one end. And I think there's at least one episode that we did, perhaps with Brent and with Chris, that ran close to like 2 hours. That's the other end. We now strive for something that's a little bit more in the middle for that. But the intent is, with The Room Where It Happened being less frequent, is that it will be intended to be long form, probably at least 2 hours each month, maybe a little bit more, so there's a chance to go really deep. So what we're encouraging folks to do, you'll find the link in the show notes. You can go to, it's still the aforkintime podcast.com website, but there's several whole sections or whole pages now that are devoted to The Room Where It Happened. You can read a little bit more about it there. There's also a place to join the team. By the way, you can join the team for A Fork in Time, too, but we expect that a lot of folks will want to join this new venture and be here from the ground up. We're doing the pre-production work now. We're starting to plan episode topics. We have, as of today, I know of at least 5 people who have committed to be part of the team, at least 5 more that are thinking about it. So we're forming the team, but there's still room for whoever wants to come. And the role doesn't have to be somebody who talks on the show.
No.
I think most people would like to do that. We welcome that. In fact, I've sort of made it a goal that I may appear on a show, but I'm not going to be any one of the analysis talking heads on the show if I can help it. But there's production, background production, audio editing, social media production. There's all kinds of things that somebody can be part of that are part of the team that your voice never has to be heard, that are vital, important parts of what's going on with the podcast. So if you go to any of the links that you'll find on aforkintimepodcast.com that relate to join the team or the room where it happened, you'll see a place to go and click join the team. There's a brief form to fill out there, and you can let us know what you're interested in doing. We encourage you to do that. This episode is going to air in the middle-ish part of May. So again, we're looking for the first episodes to launch sometime in June. Plenty of time to get on board in whatever role you might have. Anything else you want to say about that, Lex?
I'm really excited. I'm gonna probably be like you. I might be on some episodes, but I mean, even if you want to kind of be on an episode, but then you want to be a production on a different episode, that is totally fine. That's kind of how I'm planning it in my head. So we welcome you to join the team in any capacity you feel comfortable joining.
Yeah, and technical needs are actually as needed, if not more needed, than sometimes the on air. If you're the type of person that just likes to do research, but you don't want to talk about it.
That's fine too.
Or the type of person that wants to suggest topics that are great topics. You just don't want to be the one that all of that is fair game. There's sort of a place for everybody. And so, again, we wanted to take a little bit of time at the end of this episode because we knew it was going to be towards being a shorter episode otherwise, to sort of really tout that. And you'll continue to see things about that, but encourage you to be part of it. A Fork in Time, the Alternate History Podcast, is not going away. This is just something new. But our goal is to have this be with a larger group of folks that can sustain it. That means it's not robbing away from our ability to do A Fork in Time, because that's still where we started and still where we're going to be.
Right.
So we encourage you to be part of that. There's some other surveys you'll find there at the website. I encourage you to go that. Last thing I want to mention is, in launching that new podcast venture, we will have some expenses associated with that. They're pretty nominal. By the way, joining the team doesn't mean you have to pony up your share of the fund, so understand we're not asking for that. But if you are interested in being part of what supports now 2 podcasts, visit our Patreon page. You can become a patron there. One of the things that we're also very committed to, we've mentioned this, we've also been doing the production work in the background. In fact, we spent some time earlier this week talking about the thing that's going to be basically a Patreon-only exclusive series that we're doing on the late Bronze Age collapse. So there's going to be a lot more benefits to being a patron now, and we could use the support now that we're supporting 2 podcasts. So if you've been thinking about that and saying, that's too much, any amount works, and there's lots of opportunities there, and there are perks and benefits that come from that, so we invite you to go and do that. Visit us at www.patreon.com/forkintime, or one of the links you'll find there on our main webpage. The last thing that I wanted to mention, we don't always hit this as much as we used to, but I want to hit it now. The importance of rating and reviews. It really does help us to be found on podcatchers and in search engines. It doesn't change whether you're found if somebody does the right search, but it changes whether somebody who does a search will actually take the time and invest in listening to an episode. If they see a bunch of 1-star ratings, they're not going to take the time.
Yes.
If you like the show and you give us 4 or 5 stars, that'll help. Or writing a review helps. So if you haven't done that, I know that requires work, because I've actually gone realizing that I ask for it, but I haven't done it for some of the podcasts that I favor. I've made a point now of going to do that, because, and then when I do this, this is not easy to do. It's not necessarily just a click away. But if you can do that, it really helps us a lot. Plus, it gives us valuable feedback. And again, the topic suggestions, we get now multiple suggestions every week from multiple people, normally with multiple suggestions. We have a stack now of about 40 topics to choose from, and we want more. We'll get to all of them eventually. If yours is interesting enough, they'll go to the front of the line. And so we encourage that as well. Anything else you want to say to listeners, Lex?
I think you covered it.
Okay. I've talked Don got a little bit of Don got his role going there. Last thing is social media. You get to talk about social media.
Yay, I get to talk about social media. And we will have social media coming up for the room where it happened, like Dad said. But we are on Facebook, we are on Pinterest, and newly we are on Instagram. So please go and follow us. That's a great way to keep in touch with us. We do actually check the pages, and we will actually respond to you if you comment on something. So that's a great way to keep in touch with us. That's also a great way to share about the podcast with people in your network. I've done that. I'll, when we release the episode, I'll go and I'll share the link to it. I've also shared on our page kind of behind the scenes type stuff, which I love doing. I've got a marketing background in my personal life, so I'm very aware of the role that social media plays. So we would love to have you join that community on our different social media sites.
Yeah, we appreciate that. And again, the best advertising is word of mouth advertising, and social media is a form of word of mouth advertising. We've never bought a boost on Facebook. We've never purchased an ad, and my goal is to never do that. We probably could get a larger audience who would enjoy what we do. But we've grown an organic audience. We've grown a community. We use that term a lot. We've grown our community there, and even the other things that we're doing now more and more. Again, I'll mention this. Seems like we're plugging the website here hard. By the way, did a little bit of a redesign that here recently. It looks a little better. It's not going to win any awards. Don't expect massive animation and long load times on a page. But we even have links there to some other podcasts that we've shared the experience with. Brody Burton has been a guest a couple of times on the show. We've done crossover episodes from Imagine If. What I decided to do this past week was, Brody's been on the show. You can actually go to our website, follow the link for Friends at the top, and click to a page. It'll take you to where you can listen to Brody's podcast. This is not competition. This is a community. And so we're building that. So I'll just encourage you to do that. If you know of other podcasts that would be good other podcasts for us to promote, we're happy to do that, and vice versa. So just know that's out there. I know that we're a little bit unique in the alternate history space. As I go back and do searches on the web, I have found other alternate history podcasts that were short-lived and didn't last. I get why they didn't last. It's an effort to do this on a regular basis, particularly weekly. But we are, believe it or not, Lex, I saw this the other day, we are in the top 10% of podcasts worldwide in terms of listenership. That sounds impressive until you realize how many podcasts have existed for like 5 episodes and gone away. But it is something to say that we are now very close to approaching the 2-year anniversary for Fork in Time, and that's longer than we would have had. We were talking about all podcasts. Remember? Yeah, we did an episode, or touched on, which episode, it wasn't on that, but it touched on that. Went back and looked, and that was recorded over a year ago. Yep. I couldn't have told you the name of the episode.
I had to go look.
There was a time when I could name every episode in order and what they were called. We're now reached the point where the back catalog is there. This will be episode 106. So, once we cleared 100 episodes. All right. We've tried to close out like 4 times here, and I keep extending it, so I'm going to ask one last time. I think Alexa's going to tell me, no, I've got nothing else. No. She's shaking her head, no, she's got nothing else. So we'll close out here. But as we close out, we're going to close out the way that we normally close out, which is we're going to close out with, wait for it, one last thing. Before we, if you stick around after the normal A Fork in Time close, what Alexis referred to a couple of episodes ago as the Fork in Time dance mix. If you stick around for that, I'm going to just go ahead and append to the back end of this episode the little brief recording that we did. We've already told you everything about the room where it happened already. You're not going to learn anything new. But what you will get to do, if you haven't already heard it, is hear the theme music.
Yes, we even picked theme music for the room where it happened. It's really happening.
It's really happening. So if you want to stick around after the end of the A Fork in Time closing out theme here, I'm just going to append that to the end. It's like one of those things on an album or a cassette tape where there's something after the blank thing. That's where we're going.
It's the deleted scene.
It's the deleted scene. It's the end credit scene.
Yeah.
It's the end credit promotion. So I'm just going to throw that on here since we've spent so much time talking about it. You can save yourself a listen someplace else if you want to go and do that. And in the show notes for this episode will be the link to the first introductory episode on The Room Where It Happens, so you can go ahead and subscribe and not miss the premiere. That way you'll be all set up and ready to go on your podcatcher. So, really, really done here. Where our suggestion is, if you happen upon A Fork in Time, Lex, what is our suggestion to our good listeners?
Take it.
Take it. Have a great day, guys.
Thanks for listening to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Learn more and provide feedback by visiting our website at www.aforkintimepodcast.com. Connect to us on Facebook at facebook.com/aforkintime or follow us on Twitter at AFIT Podcast. If you want to support the show financially, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/aforkintime. We hope you will join us next time.
Hi, this is Don.
And Alexis.
And you probably know us, maybe, from the podcast that we do, which is called A Fork in Time. And what's A Fork in Time all about, Lex?
That'd be alternate history.
In fact, it's called A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. But we're not obviously coming to you about A Fork in Time. What are we coming to our potential new listeners about today, Lex?
That'd be our new podcast venture. Wait for it.
Wait for it. Ooh, she's stuck in the lyric. Also from what is probably the best musical of the last decade, Lex?
I would second that opinion. It is definitely Hamilton.
Hamilton, Lin-Manuel Miranda's brilliant, groundbreaking, progressive, unique musical that has a historical bend, Hamilton, that swept through Broadway and swept through popular culture in so many ways. And so one of the most interesting things about that, with Alexis and I both being fans of history, is that as we look to start another podcast here and looking to start that with a new group of folks who are going to go on that adventure with us, is we wanted to do something that's a little bit different than our alternate history genre. And so one of the most intriguing songs from Hamilton is what, Lex?
That would be The Room Where It Happened.
The Room Where It Happened, which sort of gives the background story of an event in American history where a deal was cut in a room.
Yes.
And so that started getting me thinking about, what if we did a history podcast where the twist that got us into each episode, which would be a deep exploration of some topic, probably the more obscure but yet as important the better, would be things that happened in very different and unique rooms. In other words, what are some other rooms where it happened? So that's what we're launching off here. This is sort of the introduction to that, and we invite you to come back as we begin to publish episodes here over the next couple of months. The name of the podcast is going to be what, Alexis?
The Room Where It Happened.
And what we're going to do is we're going to use that as a launching point to talk about some other interesting rooms where some other interesting things happened. So if you're a fan of history and you like to talk about some of the more interesting sort of sideline parts of history, we think this podcast will be for you, and we invite you to join us once we get rolling.